today I want to talk a little bit about relationship systems. Every relationship has a system. Now, some of the systems are loving and caring. When two people are taking loving care of themselves, when they're taking responsibility for themselves, then they come together to learn, to grow, to share love. And that is a loving system. And when you've been practicing inner bonding and you're really taking loving care of yourself, then you find yourself attracting people into your life who are also taking loving care of themselves. And you have a much better chance of creating loving relationships or friendships. But let's talk about the more common relationship systems, the more dysfunctional ones. So when you think about the ways that we abandon ourselves and the ways that we try and control as a result of that, we're abandoning ourselves, we're not bringing love into ourselves. And so, of course, in a relationship, when we're abandoning ourselves, then we want to have control over getting love from the other person. That's what I talked about last time, the codependent relationship. And we do this in numerous ways. We might get angry and blame, hoping to get the other person to give us what we want. We might withdraw, withhold love, shut down in the hopes of punishing a person. We might give ourselves up and be overly giving, overly nice. We might go into complete resistance as a way to push people away when they're trying to control us. So this creates a system. And there's controlling systems where both people, this is like a system where there's a lot of anger, a lot of fighting, where each person gets angry and blames. And there's a lot of juice in that system because there's a lot of energy in it, but obviously there's a lot of pain in that system because both people are trying to control with anger. Then there's a system where one person uses anger to control and the other might give themselves up. And so the one who's angry thinks it's working for them because the other person is giving themselves up. But the person who's giving themselves up ends up, hoping that this person is going to give them love and approval. And that never happens because you're only reinforcing the other person getting angry as a form of control. And so eventually the one who's giving themselves up ends up feeling shut down, no sexuality, feeling resentful. And so ultimately that system isn't working. And then there's a system where somebody is controlling. They may be controlling overtly with anger, or they may be controlling more covertly. They may be like subtly critical, judgmental. There's lots of ways, overt ways of trying to control other than just getting angry. And the other person hates being controlled. And so they withdraw or they go into resistance. And this is a very common system. And I see this very often with my clients that I work with, where like one person says, my husband is completely shut down to me. He won't share his feelings with me. He won't sit and talk to me. There's no emotional connection. And then the husband says, yeah, but she's always criticizing me. She's always upset with me about something. She's always wanting to talk about the problems, and it's always my fault. I'm supposed to change. And so the woman might say, well, I wouldn't be so upset if you were to be more present and connect to me. And then he says, well, I'd be more present and connect to you if you weren't so controlling and critical. And you see the system, and they're both right and they're both wrong. They're both right in that they're each doing that, but they're both wrong in making the other person responsible because they're each doing their end of the system. And they didn't just start doing it in the relationship. We start our end of these dysfunctional systems way before we meet each other. We learn these as we're growing up. If you think about your parents or others who you lived with, think about the system that they were in. You'll see that you probably identified with one or the other, and you may be creating the exact same system. I can't tell you how often a client will tell me, oh, I married my mother, or I married my father. They're exactly like my angry father. They're exactly like my critical mother. They're exactly like my withdrawn parent. And we tend to repeat because we're operating out of our end of the system. We're going to draw in somebody who is like what we've seen in our growing up years, and we're going to create the same or similar system as what we saw. Now, it's very easy to blame the other person. And of course, that doesn't get anywhere. And that's why it's so important before you actually leave a relationship that's not working, unless it's physically abusive, violent, or deeply emotionally abusive. It's so much better to hang in there until you really have dealt with your end of the system. And then it will become apparent. I mean, sometimes that person is going to get worse. You know, like if you're a caretaker and you're not caretaking anymore, they might get more angry, more withdrawn. And then it becomes apparent that you might be wanting to leave that system, that relationship. But very often, when one person really does the work of learning to love themselves and not trying to get love, but coming to the partner to share love, coming truly open to learning, instead of just trying to get the other person to change, very often the whole system changes. It's amazing that one of us can have such a powerful effect on the system. Now, of course, this doesn't always work. Didn't with my relationship, because I realized that I was in a control compliance system. I was the one who gave myself up, but I didn't realize that was also a form of control, a covert form of control. And so when I realized how much I was trying to control with my caretaking, my compliance, and I started to focus on what it was like to love myself, then it became apparent that the system was not going to work because it had been based on my compliance, and nothing less than that was going to be acceptable. And that's hard. It's hard. It was really hard for me because this was a 30-year marriage. And I loved the essence of my husband, but I couldn't deal with his wounded self. We can love who somebody is in their essence, but if their wounded self is not tolerable, then the relationship isn't going to work. And so it became apparent after letting go of taking care of everybody and starting to take care of myself, which is what healed me from being so sick. It wasn't going to work, but I wouldn't have known that. And I wouldn't have done the learning and growth that I needed to do if I had just left. And so I'm very grateful that I stayed and did the inner bonding work that I needed to do, because then once it became apparent that the relationship wasn't going to work, I didn't keep having the hope. I mean, I always wanted my family to be intact. I did not want that to happen. And it's hard when you want that, but it wasn't loving to me to stay in a relationship where the only way it would work is by me giving myself up. And I, as I said before, if I would have kept doing that, I would have died because I was getting so depleted. But it does take courage to change your end of the system. But the good news is that most of the time when I work with clients, whether it's one or both of them, when one person changes their end of the system gets better. There's no guarantee, but more of the time it gets better rather than worse. And so, like I said, I think it's always worth doing your work and seeing what's going to happen unless there's physical abuse or severe emotional abuse. This week's episode is brought to you by the Inner Bonding Masterclass. When you join this membership, you'll be part of a compassionate and supportive community who understands what you're going through and who will help you throughout your healing journey. The Inner Bonding membership is created to provide laser coaching for you and others in the community who may be facing the same struggles, so that you can practice the inner bonding process more effectively and apply it to your life. You also get to vote on the topic that we will focus on in our bi-monthly masterclass. This way, you and the community will always learn about and get guidance on the topic you're requesting most. Go to innerbonding.com/members to join us. You can use the code BENEFIT to get a 10% discount on your registration at checkout. Again, go to innerbonding.com/members.